everyone. Welcome to the Stoa. Today we have our good friends, Yuli Jadov and the man formerly known as Colin Bested, Virabhadra. And the session is called Two Effective Altruists Walk into a Monastery. Oof. So Yuli and Virabhadra were friends of mine in Toronto, and they were part of a central part of the Effective Altruist movement, and that's how I met them. And they were plugged into the same weird meta-modern sense-making space. And one of the players near Toronto was the Monastic Academy, the Willow branch. And both Yuli and then Colin, now Virabhadra, went to the Monastic Academy for a stay, and they sort of drifted paths. Yuli sort of returned more to the effective altruist route, and Colin became Virabhadra. And so they're gonna today's session is basically talking about this, which I think is pretty cool. How they both had the same experience and they had the similar intellectual background, but they went separate ways. So we're here for roughly 60 minutes, probably a little bit longer. Yuli's sort of going to lead today's session, so I'll tag him in a moment. But we will have a Q&A portion, so if you have any questions anytime, just drop them in the chat, and I'll call on you. You can ask your question to either Yuli or Virabhadra. And basically, the session is going to be both of them talking about their experience and having a conversation together before we pivot to the Q&A. So I think I had everything I had to say. So that being said, I will tag in Yuli.
Awesome. It is awesome to be here. And thank you, Peter, so much for inviting us. I'm very excited to see all these warm faces that I know of and some people who I don't know of. And I'm excited to see what can actually emerge in this conversation. Yeah, so maybe I'll outline briefly just the structure, like how we're gonna structure this event today. And so Virabhadra and I will start by sharing a little bit of our individual stories, like something we were interested in, and then how we came through the effective altruism movement and landed at Willow, and then what emerged for us, where we decided to go from there. And that will be something like 5 minutes each, roughly, though we won't be strict on the timing. And then we will take some time to engage in a dialectic together. Hopefully, we're going to find some juicy points of inquiry, intrigue, and disagreement that can lead us somewhere unexpected in today's call. And then from that space, Virabhadra will lead a short meditation, somewhere around 10 minutes, maybe. And that will allow us to sink into what is this? What is this conversation? What's alive for us? How are we feeling? Who are we now? And then from that moment, then we'll tag Peter back in, and we'll have the group Q&A and engage in a community inquiry for what is this for all of us? What's coming out? What can we do with all of this? So that's the structure we'll go for. And with that, Virabhadra, would you like to go first, or should I go for an intro?
I'm happy to jump in. Does that work?
Go for it.
Great. Hello everyone, my friends. So, what brings us here today? Brings me here today. Talk a bit about myself and how the title came about. 2 A's walk into Monastic Academy. So I think the place I'll start this story for me is when I was a teenager, and I was just facing a lot of, you could say, boredom and desperation at one time. And this led on a bit of this turned into seeking, into a journey, and I found Buddhism, but I didn't find any people interested in Buddhism or any monastics or anything. I just found a website called zenguide.com. So for about a couple months when I was a teenager, I got really into meditating and thinking I had these Buddhist superpowers. And then it just sort of drifted away. It didn't feature much in my life, but from the time I was a teenager, there's this undercurrent where there's something to this whole like sitting in silence thing, this whole like discovering what it means to live an ethical life through some kind of training, whatever that may be. And then I found myself at university studying philosophy, studying ethics. That's where I found out about someone named Peter Singer, a philosopher, ethicist, and finding out about him sort of changed my life. It provided a new answer to the question, how to live, what is worth living for, what is good. And that just kept deepening for me, this question of how to live an ethical life. What can I do to be of service? And by the end of university, I didn't have a clear idea of what to do with this inquiry. I was just sort of like looking for something, looking for a way to help. And then, thanks to friends and luck, found something called effective altruism. I'm not sure how familiar folks are with effective altruism, but I'll say it is a movement of people started roughly about a decade ago who are interested in the question of how can we do the most good with the resources we have. And at the time in my life where I'd been sort of struggling with ethics, the question of how to live, how to do good, effective altruism caused this big shift in how I was orienting to that question. Before, I had been very much stuck in my own local environment, my own skills, and to some degree my own mind. But effective altruism opened things up to the world. What are the issues that humans and other living beings are facing across the world? And can I be part of that story? Can I do something of service, not just considering what is immediately available to me, but what is more globally available? What are history's problems? What are the problems we're facing now that are bigger than anything else? Whether it's pandemics, nuclear security, emerging technology. So this just rocked my world, and for many years I was very dedicated to effective altruism, to building the community in Toronto. So I met some folks here, and oh my, such a rewarding endeavor. But throughout that whole endeavor, there was this struggle, this sense of like, is it enough? Like, am I actually learning to collaborate with others? Am I actually learning to answer this question better and better each day, each month? How can I use my resources? How can I use my life to help others as effectively as possible? And after being in this inquiry of effective altruism for about 2.5 or so years, including like my job being to build the community in Toronto, holding that inquiry, just something about my life, my body was starting to feel the pressure of these questions and feel that the answers I had, the life I was living, was not an appropriate response. And one word I have for this now is a kind of burnout, where I just felt myself day by day losing energy, grappling with these massive questions, working with people on them, but just staring into this void almost sort of drained me. And around that same time, I found the place I'm at right now, Willow Monastic Academy. So it was not officially open. It was just a group of friends at that point, figuring things out. Mainly the person who started it and runs it now. Her name is Sation, formerly Yasna. created this space where people could do a kind of modern monastic training based on something in Vermont called Maple, Monastic Academy for the Preservation of Life on Earth. A place where someone like me could go and face this internal conflict while not ignoring the problems of the world, but see this as a kind of leadership training to shore up my resources, to find deeper questions, deeper answers, and deeper questions, to face these massive problems, to face these issues, and to learn how to collaborate, learn how to lead in this time of change, in this time of transformation, this time of uncertainty. So there was something about the training that just was incredibly challenging for me. I would question why I stayed there like every couple of days, but there was also something incredibly rewarding about following this rigorous schedule, getting up pretty early in the morning. It used to be 6 a.m. in the morning. Now I get up for 5, and we chant, we meditate, exercise, do things to care for our mind, care for our body. We throw ourselves into a work period, and then we follow an evening activity to learn about how to live in community or to learn about what we can offer the world. And then we meditate and chant, and the next day we do this again and again, and we keep building these skills. And I have just found this to be quite nourishing, not just for my mind and my body, but for this inquiry of how can I do the most good? How can I actually collaborate with others? So I've decided to continue deepening my training in this tradition. Taken on, well, I was given the name Vīrabhadra, and that was lay ordained. You can go into that later if there's interest. But yeah, I think that gives you some idea of where I'm at, where I've come from. And now you get to find this wonderful friend I met along the journey, Yuli.
Nice. Okay, so I'm realizing I've been making some assumptions about how familiar everybody in this audience is with effective altruism and with monasticism in general. And what I would like to do is just take a 10 to 15 second pause to see if everybody can sort of from using their head as a metric, with the top being oh, I know everything about this. I could totally be giving a talk about it right now. And bottom being I just heard about this today. Kind of indicate your familiarity level with effective altruism first. If everybody could just indicate that on video, I would appreciate that. Okay. And nice to see some other faces coming on. Okay, so some kind of mix. I think, yeah, it's looking kind of halfway-ish. Thank you. And let's do that one more time for Monastic Academy and that entire set of philosophies and practices. Again, top being I could be running a monastery, and the bottom being what's that? Okay. A little bit lower on average, I think. All right. Thank you for giving me that input. Okay, so I would like to still give my bio, but before that, maybe I'll spend just a bit of time. I will give a 2-minute overview of effective altruism, and I will rely on Vīrabhadra to give a 2-minute overview of monastic academy philosophy and essential principles for us, so we can act and listen from that shared context a bit better. Okay, here's the rough overview of effective altruism. It is a movement. That's what it fundamentally is. Effective altruism is a description for a movement. A movement is a bunch of people worldwide doing a wide variety of different things that are brought together under the banner of a single sort of set of techniques, a single major inquiry. And I think that was actually really well expressed by Vīrabhadra when he said, it's the inquiry of how do we use our limited resources to do the most good that we can. And the spirit of that inquiry is one where we try to figure out the best answers that we can. So we sort of explicitly say, let's not just act by default. Let's not just trust whatever the default set of actions is, or default set of cultural assumptions or norms, or even sometimes our intuitions and feelings, but let's explicitly bring in other methods and other ways of sense making so we can discern with as much clarity as is accessible to us where's the space where we can be doing more good, having more of a positive impact, and ensuring that we can avoid the road to hell being paved with good intentions. That's the fundamental philosophy of effective altruism. And then worldwide, there's a bunch of people doing different things, which includes like $40 billion worth of funding. Currently, it includes like 200 chapters, which are sort of like nonprofits, sometimes incorporated, sometimes not, which are small communities bringing people together to share ideas and resources. It includes a wide variety of different organizations who are boots on the ground trying to make the world a better place, which range from research institutes like the Future of Humanity Institute or the Global Priorities Research Institute, to charities who are taking specific action in the realms of like global poverty, such as like, let's say, Fortify Health, who is trying to improve nutrition in India in order to save X number of lives from like birth defects by fortifying flour. And so that's like one example. So there are a wide variety of different organizations doing whatever it is that they are making sense of as being like, oh, this is really impactful on the margin. Okay, so that's effective altruism. It says global movement includes a bunch of people. There's funding, there's communities, there's action. It's brought together by the active inquiry. You try to make sense of what's happening. You take action in order to like live that value, and you use that action to inform the inquiry. And you do this collectively so that you can do it better, because doing it alone sucks. That's effective altruism in like a 2.5 minute thing. Okay, over to Vīrabhadra for a brief description of monasticism.
Yes, so talk about two things. So one of them is monasticism more generally, and the other one is the monastic academy, what that means. So first, monasticism more generally. I don't have a lot to say here because I'm not a monk. The monastic academy it's not a monastery. It's a monastic academy. The difference being my understanding of what a monastery is and what monasticism is, it's about a more singular devotion to, some would say, training, some would say the divine, some would say seeking, searching, some would say just to living in community, living with certain rules, principles, living with a certain amount of renunciation and dedication, so that you can find something perhaps beyond the world and come into direct relationship with that. That's my understanding of monasticism. And where monastic academy fits into this is seeing monasticism, especially Buddhism in particular, but also many parts of the world spiritual tradition, including a lot of indigenous influences from Lakota and other groups. Seeing this as important, but as insufficient to deal with the problems that the world is facing, the existential risks, the risks to life on earth that the world is facing right now. So the monastic academy, as a response, is focused on, at the highest level, enabling collaboration through the world, and you could say towards ending human greed. I could talk about this for a while, but I'll just bullet point that is the goal at the highest level is to end human greed, to find a way to live individually and collectively that is in harmony with other beings, and not so much focused on just doing whatever it is that we want to do individually, but thinking about collective wants, global. So more specifically, the Monastic Academy does this through creating a culture, creating training systems, creating individual monastic academies, as well as, in the works, villages that build this culture that is towards ending greed. And we do this through both monastic training, similar to a monastery, but less strict generally. And we do it through friendship, through building ethical economic relationships with others, through reinterpreting monasticism so that it's appropriate, an appropriate response in the modern world. To live ethically, to live towards a world with more harmony, less greed, as a way to deal with existential risks. So Willow is still in the process of forming our vision, but what I've illustrated here is a take on the vision of Maple, the main and original monastic academy branch in Vermont. There we go. Back to you.
Thank you for that. And if you guys continue to have questions, please definitely drop them in the chat. So define friendships, like Maggie's question here. Correct me if I'm wrong, Vīrabhadra. I hear Maggie's question, did you define friendships as that? And I'm thinking that you gave an example of like how to define friendships, but you weren't trying to be exhaustive.
Exactly, not exhaustive, but seeing this as a part, a very basic part of friendship is asking the question, how can we support each other? How can I offer you something? How can you offer me something? Not as much based on what we normally think of as an economic exchange. But yeah, we can definitely get into this more. It's a very juicy topic.
Okay. And so what I would like to do now is give like the short 5-minute bio of like, who am I in relation to this conversation and what's my history? And then from there, maybe we will we will do the meditation, and then probably for time constraint reasons, we will open it up right away to Q&A and maybe have that dialectic as part of a communal discussion to ensure that we have space to actually speak to you all and don't spend all of our time just, Vīrabhadra and I speaking. Okay, but here's a short bio for me. I also like superpowers. So when Vīrabhadra said he, had the experience of like becoming interested in Buddhism and superpowers, that's something very appealing to me. I grew up in a rather impoverished and violent and abusive household and past, which maybe I'll just give like one salient example of this is that, or two, I like ran a gang as a kid. So I grew up like as a hoodlum, and from there had the direct experience of knowing what it is like to hurt people. And from that was able to cultivate and develop my own orientation for what I would like to be doing with my life. Like, is it hurting people or is it helping people? What does that feel like? What does that mean to me? So I was able to have the direct experience of these things, and from there build up the orientation to saying like, oh, actually it really matters to me to live a life where I'm not hurting people, where instead I'm helping people. So that's like the sort of like primal psychological basis from which a lot of my inquiry and focus has grown. Okay, so that's like the deep roots of like who is Yuli as a human. And then we can say, then I'm also just like a playful, explorative person. And I've always been interested in the capacity of the mind to do many things. And maybe I will tag a point of potential richness for a dialectic now by saying that like, I am a greedy person. I like greed. I think there are forms of greed that are really counterproductive, and there are forms of greed, or we could call it greed, depending on how we choose to use that phrasing, that are just like, that can be nurtured and developed and flourished in a very healthy way, where there are like internal callings, and that actually a sense of desire in relationship to one's internal calling is actually a very fulfilling part of how I enjoy showing up in my life. And I say this now because this is related to how I became also interested in the monastic academy, and in part why I'm interested in effective altruism. So from my roots as saying like, I want to live a life that actually helps people, I looked around the world and I felt under-resourced. I felt like our challenges were really overwhelming. And having found that there is a global community of people taking very seriously the set of questions of like, how do we determine what the real problems are and where there is space for meaningful, effective action in addressing those problems. I found that to be really empowering, and that was like my main motivational draw into the effective altruism movement. But it also comes from this, like what is appropriately partially described as greed, which is a kind of like internal yearning to say like, I want to do this thing that I want to do. How do I maximize that? How do I like feed that internal yearning and drive and calling? Where effective altruism is just like, oh, here's a bunch of resources. You want to do good stuff in the world? Okay, here's a global network of people who are seriously thinking about this question. You know, people from the most prestigious universities spending their careers on some of these questions, and like enough funding that you could probably actually do what you think is the right thing to do without having to worry about like classic return on investment, like market mechanic Moloch hijacking of your work product. So this kind of like greed of mine is what has actually led me to becoming so infatuated with effective altruism. That's my very personal way of talking about it that I want to reveal as a space for like some rich inquiry with us together. And then when I heard about the Monastic Academy, that was in part also this question of like, okay, well, if I want to actually be able to do good in the world, I have to be able to orient towards all the classic challenges that stop everybody else. Because I look around and I'm like, it's clear to me that not everyone is doing like all that they could be doing in order to live out their own values for what they would like the world to be. And I think that there's a lot of personal challenges that come up, right? They vary, so it'll be very hard for me to try to give any good summary of those now. But I'll just say there are plenty of personal challenges, and I see monastic leadership training as one of the effective pathways to being able to really spend time with those personal challenges and learn to master them for the sake of something. Where for me, that something was already my personal sort of greed, my personal ambition to work towards making the world a better place in a way which satisfies me, in a way that is oriented towards other people and fundamentally is a thing that I want to do. It's this like beautiful relationship where there's like this win-win, where I want to benefit people I've never met and I want to be able to like feel that that's what I'm doing. That's important to me as an individual. All right, so that's a bunch of like how Yuli orients emotionally and psychologically to doing good, and a little bit about how I've been exposed to the effective altruism global network, what drew me in, and then what drew me into monasticism. And I'll finish up this bio. I wonder if I'm going too long. Yeah, it's fine. It's adequate time. I'll finish that up by saying that after I had spent some time at the Willow Monastic Academy, one of the things that I walked away with was saying, I really don't need to be in this monastic academy to go do the things that are most alive and most helpful. Which isn't to say that I didn't benefit tremendously and wonderfully from being there for the time that I was there, but it is to say that that is currently how I'm seeing things. Like there is an option for me right now in my life to go spend more time at a monastic academy, and I'm not taking that option. So that's kind of what I wanted to bring up, this kind of idea of, this is how two people have decided to diverge their paths. And I want to hold space for us to inquire and see and feel into those differences in perspective and capacity and appetite, and potentially mistakes and blind spots that each of us might have, and hopefully help both us see ourselves better and each of you see yourselves better through a community dialogue on this subject, including possibly very much like what are these movements to you in the first place? Do you care about making the world a better place? How? Why? Where's that coming from? What is maybe altruism, or what is greed to you, for example? All right, so hopefully I've piqued some interest by describing things the way I have. So now I think would be a good time to pause and do a meditation as a group, and then go to the group Q&A. Does that sound good to Vīrabhadra, Peter?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yep.
Let's do it.
Just do a quick breath, but yeah. All right. So yeah, we'll just meditate I invite you to meditate for a few minutes. It's of course optional. You can of course continue doing whatever else is your mind or body wants to do. But I invite everyone now to take a few deep breaths. And simply come into a posture that is a little more elevated, a little more alert. Any movement is fine to get there. You can play around a little. Come into a posture that is a little more energetic and alive. And in this posture, can you also find a sense of groundedness and of relaxation? So just taking a minute to feel the body and to find a posture with both of these qualities, with this alertness and with relaxation. Making even small movements can be important. And from this posture now, I invite you to take a few more breaths, seeing if you can deepen the breath. Relax and let the energy flow. And just getting a taste of what it's like now to have this body, to have this mind. And when you're ready, perhaps with a few more breaths, coming back to the group, bringing the attention back to the collective as I hand things over to Peter to lead us into a Q&A.
Awesome. I quite enjoyed those intros. So if you have any questions, start putting in the chat. And I imagine our two guests today are okay to go over the hour. Probably end 15 minutes, maybe 30 minutes after the hour, so no rush. I'll ask the first question. And I'm curious, any reflections on each other's shares? I think that's a good place to start. So maybe Virabhadra, if you want to go first with that.
Yeah. Oh, it was nice. Oh, so nice to get to see Yuli's story in a different way, because we've been friends for a couple of years now, but to sort of get a glimpse of how Yuli sees Yuli and this journey. And yeah, so I mean, the main theme that's sort of sticking out for me is what is meant by greed. And I really resonate with a lot of what Yuli was sharing about, like this, you could say, this kind of like hunger, this greed to do something. And there's so many different ways to show up in the world given that force, given that energy. And yeah, so that's one of the things that's resonating with me a lot. The other one is just stressing that there are options that Yuli stated at the end, like he has the choice of like what context to be in, as do I. And we chose differently, but we still collaborate. We still find friendship. We find opportunities to just sort of figure each other out. Why did you make that decision? Why are you doing that? Why aren't you doing this? What can we learn from each other? And yeah, just so much of, I think both of our intros express to me a kind of a learning journey that we're very much so figuring out how we can face these inquiries, how we can face these questions, these techniques, these communities, these movements, not just effective altruism and not just a small community of Monastic Academy, but so many communities that are featured here on Stoa, and so many parts of these deep inquiries into how to live, how to be alive, how to lead, how to follow. Yeah, so those are a few reflections I have.
I've got a couple as well. So what I'll do is I'll share one thing that I think is this like deep common thread that I'm noticing in our reflections, and then one place where I think we diverge. And then I'll mention something that I really liked that spoke to me from the end of what Vīrabhadra had just voiced. Thank you, Lisa. Okay, so one thing that I noticed that is very similar from our reflections is this notion of an inquiry. Where like effective altruism is definitely, in my eyes, like an inquiry. Like that's the whole process, is the inquiry. And I think that's also a fair way of summarizing a lot of monastic training. And in Vīrabhadra's reflection, what I heard was that he was continuing the inquiry that he started in effective altruism by deepening his monastic training. So I think that is a really intriguing thread that connects these movements like deeply. Like, why is it that they're showing, what does it mean to be an inquiry? What does that mean? How do you show up differently in the world? What are your ideas and your actions doing differently when you are an inquiry versus a sort of like, maybe let's say a planned task that you're just executing? So that's something really cool there. It probably would be cool to create a Venn diagram. And then one place where I think we diverge is that Vīrabhadra had talked about asking what to do in his life. And I believe my experience is different than that, or at least it's conceptualized differently. So I hope I'm accurate about my own psyche when I say this, though I leave space for being wrong. But I believe what I'm usually looking for is not actually the question of like, what do I do? It's how do I do it? It's almost like I looked around the world and I saw problems and I was like, cool, I actually want to fix these. I want to work on these because I've already decided this is important to me. And then I saw effective altruism and I saw Monastic Academy as a set of resources, as a set of ways of like doing the thing better, doing the same thing I was already doing, but like learning how to do it better, learning how to become a better person, learning how to work with others to do that. Getting access to deeper reaches of like problem-solving capacity, essentially. And so I think that's an interesting divergence in our psychologies, if I'm identifying it correctly, where I am more asking the question of like, how to do a thing. And Vīrabhadra might be asking more of the question of like, what is it that needs to be done? Okay, so that's an interesting space for divergence. And lastly, I will notice, and this is to Max asked the question, what's the best way to help the world? And Virabhadra in his reflection just kind of like teased us a little bit. He said, well, we continue collaborating, we continue having a friendship. We ask each other, why do you do this? And I felt like I was invited by that teaser to sort of say like, yeah, there is one prominent question that we've recently touched on together. And that's kind of like, yeah, why are you doing this versus the other thing? And I think that's worth giving some time. I think that that would make for a good dialectic. And so I will say one thing on that, and that's, I believe actually monastic training and effective altruism as a movement are both in like deeply valuable things without which, or without something comparable to replace them, the world is basically screwed. Like we actually need these things. These things are necessary. And my own personal approach to like how I want to find my space in the ecosystem of opportunity is really drawn towards effective altruism as opposed to monastic training, in part because I think that actually monastic training is like less imminent as a global solution. It's more imminent at the individual level and less imminent at the global level. It appears to me to require many years of success for the monastic academy model in order to scale up and really have a massive influence on how things are running today in order to avert existential crisis. Whereas I think effective altruism has shorter term leverage that it can act on when faced with that similar dynamic. And so that's an interesting space of like noticing that there's a shorter term and longer term approach. And I think that's one space where Virabhadra and I are drawn differently. So that's worth noticing.
Any follow-up on that, Virabhadra?
Yes, that definitely brought up some themes that I have like been working with. And I think one thing is there's a part of me that wants to, I think, agree with you about the question of how being more important than the question of what. But I do think they're connected. So basically, the question I keep asking myself, and I'll invite everyone into today, is how to live. In particular, at Willow right now, we're starting an inquiry into ethics as one aspect of life to harmonize. There are many aspects of life we could harmonize. We could harmonize around psyche, all the things going on there, the thoughts, emotions. We could harmonize our physical body. We could harmonize relationships, communities. But within ethics, there's this, how do I live? And it brings up the question of values, like what values are driving my behavior. And for me, I think there's something very important in what you're saying, Yuli, about what we do seeming perhaps less important than how we do it. Or at least that those deeply, deeply should co-inform each other. We should know the how as deeply as the what, perhaps more deeply. Yeah, I think that's the biggest thing that I want to respond to. And maybe I'll just give like a teaser sort of bookmark on the other one, which is timelines and urgency. This is a lot to unpack, but basically the view that I see myself and Monastic Academy taking is that meditating is a way to deal with imminent existential risk. Meditating is a way to deal with the imminent destruction of species, the imminent shifting of climate. Meditation is a way to try to address the root of these issues, which is what we're trying to do, address the root. Yeah, so I'll just maybe give that little emphatic bookmark.
So I can pivot to Q&A now, but I just want to ask you two. I sense there's a live exchange here. There's like this, there's differences that could be teased out. Do you want to continue on for maybe 10 more minutes, and then we go to Q&A, or would you like to go to Q&A now?
I'm really attracted to both. And I think that we are probably capable of teasing out more differences with the group. So I'd err on the side of opening up.
Cool. I agree.
Okay. Maggie wants to stir the pot, it seems. So Maggie, if you can unmute yourself and ask your question.
Maybe I shouldn't have framed it that way. Firstly, thank you for hosting this talk. And I've been friends with you both for so long. And it's incredible to just even witness the journey that both of you have been on and reflect on it and the context that you're both in. So kudos for pursuing these paths. I really respect both of you and love both of you so much. But I think I'm I don't know, maybe I'm attracted to conflict or drama right now or something, but I'm really curious because I know and I respect both movements and methods or ideologies deeply. I'm curious for you both, what pushed you away from the other? What was it about EA? What was about Monastic Academy or monasticism training that didn't resonate with you? And I just want to note that I'm coming from the perspective that both are needed and we need multiple people, multiple movements in different spaces and places. So not to discard or discredit the value of either, but for you personally, what was it that just felt, this isn't fit for me at this time?
Okay. Shall I go first or would you like to?
Well, I have no idea what I'm going to say. So I want to feel into that uncertainty by going first, actually. I'm just going to, it's a little more exciting when that happens. So I want to take advantage. Otherwise, I'll accidentally form thoughts while you're speaking and then it'll be more cookie cutter. Okay, so I think one thing that doesn't, that draws me away from monastic training. So here's the edgiest thing that I could possibly say. The edgiest thing I could say is I don't think I need it. I don't think I need any more training. That doesn't mean that I'm never gonna keep growing as a person. I think every aspect of my life is gonna continue to teach and nurture and challenge me, because that's just the nature of personhood as far as I understand it, is it's a continuous process. And I don't see any value in sitting down and living the sort of militaristic training regimen of Monastic Academy right now. For me, what appears to be as in there are bits of value and they are outstripped, outshined, out attracted by other things that I'm drawn to, such as what's happening right now in the effective altruism movement. And maybe a good way of conceptualizing it is something like, were I to be spending more time in a monastic context right now, the primary value of that, the primary attractor, among many, and many of which cannot be known, so that's important to say, is that I'm not going to be able to give a thorough analysis. That's just not how that works either. If you knew all the training that you could be doing and all the progress yet to be made, there wouldn't be any progress to make. You could just, apply your knowledge, whatever that is in the experiential way. But anyway, so to summarize what might be attractive for me there now is okay, well, I could be working deeply with a community in order to master all the different elements of I'm hesitant to use any Buddhist lingo. So I was gonna say self and non-self, but those are placeholder words for me. I don't know what they mean to me or to others clearly enough to be able to stick to that particular language. Rather, what I mean is like the whole ontology and pattern of experience that creates what's happening in any given instant for some individual and between individuals. That's what I mean. This kind of like personal and collective, like nuanced, what's at the fundamental, what are the fundamental elements of existence? That. So I could spend time continuing to master that. And then I have to ask myself, okay, well, why would I do that? What's the point of that? Like, of course I could do that. And can I really escape that? Can I really not do it? Is it even truly possible for me to not do any learning? I don't think so. I think it's possible for me to like under-specialize in some manner of inquiry, for sure. I could like fail to pay attention to any of my bodily sensations for a month, let's say. I don't know. But, probably I don't think that's actually realistic, but let's actually say a day. That's more realistic. It could happen. Maybe a specific day is so busy. There's so much shit going on my calendar that actually my mind is just drawn task to task to task to task. And that entire day, I could, it's plausible. I don't think it's happened yet, but it's plausible that I could spend that entire day without, for a single moment, becoming clearly aware of the nature of my experience and how it's being created. Instead, I could just be like kind of hijacked by like the flow of task force without any conscious awareness and participation in the essence of reality. I could do that. And it's like, okay, do I want to avoid that? Is that really so bad that could happen like one day out of some 6 months or something like that? Like so there's one attractor point is like deepen your mastery of reality. Second attractor point of monastic living might be something like, well, you're working with a community to do that, and that's different. There's unexpected, unanticipated, and unarticulable effects that ripple out from the way that you interact with that community. And that's also true for effective altruism, right? You're still interacting with people. You're still being a person. People are still affected by where you glance and what you do and what you omit to do. So I'm mostly attracted to this idea of like, what's going to develop the parts of me that are hungry right now, and what's going to have what I think is going to be a more effective impact on net. And I think given my personal orientation and what I'm hungry for and what's possible for me right now and what value I can get from monastic living, I think I could do much more in the effective altruism space than I could in the monastic space. I think that even though we absolutely need to address the root causes of issues, I think that actually that takes a while, and we might actually end up destroying the planet before then. And it's vital that some people focus on not destroying us before then. We need the runway to do proper cultural enlightenment, if you want to phrase it that way. Whatever way you want to phrase it. There obviously is change afoot and change that's required. And we need the runway for it. And I feel like it's imperative that there are people focused on that. And I'm drawn to it, and I feel capable of working in that area. And I'm like inspired and energized by it. I think that's a good summary of how my interest is being drawn out between the two. Sorry if that was long.
Okay. Yeah, a lot there. Yeah, I'll jump in. Perhaps I'll jump in close to where you started with like this destruction, the threat of great suffering, great destruction. And for me, what originally, you could say, pushed me out of effective altruism, yeah, feels a little vulnerable, but like, I think what originally pushed me out of effective altruism was knowing how big the problems were, like just getting a taste of it, and a sense of real, like just personal self-judgment and inadequacy. And I think that's the original kick, was just, there was something lacking in me that was that was stopping this whole this life. I was stopping my own life from unfolding in a more ethical, more beautiful way. I could just feel more. So I'm not sure if that's effective altruism or if that's just this mind and this body. But what I could say is that the structures that were afforded by effective altruism were not particularly helpful in helping me deal with that, in helping me face this inner work that I think was the original push away. Uh, uh, and then for a year, I very much so struggled with trying to do both, trying to integrate both, trying to bring all this monastic work, all this training to effective altruism, and just thinking about ways, feeling into ways to do that. But there's something deeper, maybe spicier, about why I'm not involved much with the contexts and methods of effective altruism today. There is something about effective altruism that I find like extremely beautiful and also kind of scary. And I saw this within myself. The beauty of it is the great love, the great aspiration to face the problems of the world, to use resources intelligently and effectively. But I see right within that, I see a way of viewing the world. I think effective altruists have a view of the world, and that view, as with any view of the world, has its limitations. For instance, is the effective altruism movement ever going to stop participating, the individuals within it, you know, maybe myself or Yuli, individuals who've been part of this, are we going to stop participating in causing the very things that effective altruism claims to be wanting to deal with? Like, for instance, climate change. How can we make, you know, decisions on an individual level, on a communal level that face this, instead of putting the problem somewhere else, trying to solve the world's climate change, whereas in my own impact falls less out of focus. It's more about the world as opposed to what's my part in this. What am I accountable for? What is my responsibility? What is mine to own? So yeah, there's a degree to which I think there's a beauty to effective. It has this aspiration to do so much, but in the same way, I think in some ways there's like a beautiful humility to that massive aspiration, to knowing we need to learn and inquire more. But in some ways, I see it as perhaps to be a bit cutting. And I see this all within myself, that there's ineffective altruism. There's perhaps a lack of humility, a sense that this is a new way of looking. This effective altruist perspective is trying to end suffering, is a new way of looking, when in reality, so many communities, traditions have been trying to do this for hundreds, for thousands of years, trying to ask this question of how can we do the most good with the resources we have? How can we end suffering? Not the same question, but extremely similar questions have been asked by different people, different cultures. And I mean, that's what I see myself as doing now, trying to learn about Buddhism, trying to learn about these spiritual traditions of the world that have been trying to do what I think Maggie and others pointed out earlier, seems to be the similar why effective altruism, why Monastic Academy, to end suffering, to emerge a world with greater harmony. So that's a piece of what sort of pushes me away from effective altruism, or at least generates fear, as I continue to want to collaborate in some way with folks, present, past, future, effective altruists. How's that made? Yeah.
Any shares you'd like to say, Maggie?
Not in this form, but yeah, appreciate both shares. Thank you.
Cool.
I have a question that I'd like to put out for the group, and maybe if no one's feeling it, that's cool too. But the question is something like, how is it that the unique networks that are represented by the people who are here in What's Alive for You today, how is it that these networks are orienting towards this relationship of inner and outer work? And I say this knowing and holding the perspective of being attracted to the LSA network in particular as some examples of humans who I see being demonstrating a constant sort of like awareness of internal work and the willingness to engage with lots of different tools with which some external outer work might be more approachable. So that's the thing I'm holding, and I'm kind of curious about how others are feeling into that tension, that balance, that dialectic or dance.
I am curious if LSA, either Daniel or Jean, or David, I should say, or Jean would like to jump in.
I think I'm too busy trying to monitor and write into the chat to even have tracked the very last part of what was said. So I'm not quite sure how to jump in, but I'm listening.
I'm not sure how articulated I can be about it, but there's something around the nature of the languaging of inner versus outer that feels relevant to address, at least in some way, where the to divide the work of inner and outer is itself a fragmentation that feels funny relative to the kind of work that we all seem to care for. You know, the same kind of division between body and mind, the same kind of division between self and the world, that makes it so that working on the self somehow is different from working on the world, and working on the world is somehow different from working from the self, or just separate from, as opposed to different from. It's certainly different, but separate is sort of the how separate is sort of the question that I think I want to ask. And I think each of us have to face that inquiry in some senses alone, and in some senses in solidarity with everyone else. And yeah, we're definitely in it.
Daniel, you had a question or share earlier. Would you like to jump off mute and ask it?
Yeah, feel free to shut down if it's too personal. But sorry, nice to see you guys again. You talked about like friendship and like collaboration as like extremely important, and as like a central theme, or like maybe part of the actual mission of Monastic Academy, and collaboration being part of the actual mission of effective altruism. So I mean, you guys like lived in the same academy together. I've been there. It's not a huge place, so I imagine that there was a lot of like spending time together. And yeah, so I'm just wondering, like, well, what's that friendship like, and like what our friendship collaboration, like what was it like to be with each other, like in this small space, and also keeping in mind like the different viewpoints, and you know, in retrospect, seeing like the different directions that you guys go, but maybe knowing or not knowing at the time. Like,
I'm struck by knowing that there are so many threads that I could follow as a way of answering this question, and I'm concerned that I don't know how to address any of them concisely, like zero. So I'm wondering what I want to do here. I could just like throw some fire on this, and then just like see what happens, playfully. So like one thing I will say, Okay, so I'll give you a point of like intrigue of conflict, and I'll give you a point of synergy. And I'll cherry pick 2 examples because I don't know how to talk about things broadly. So one point of intrigue of conflict, when Vīrabhadra and I first started living together at Willow, I think there was a conversation in which he was like, I don't trust you. And then we had to look at that kind of dynamic regularly. And that's part of what Willow is as a training academy, is being able to ask those hard questions of like, what is your relationship to another person and why and how? Okay, so that's a point of fire we can look at. And I'll give a point of synergy, which is something like my current emotional orientation to conversations with Vīrabhadra. I think in our last conversation, there continues to be like differences in how we approach the world and like a deep meta alignment, which is to say that like last time we had a conversation, maybe it was like 2 weeks ago or something. I basically started, after a brief check-in, I just like threw a bunch of questions at him about like effective altruism, because he was the organizer for Effective Altruism Toronto before myself. And at some point he was like, well, is that why we're talking right now? Do you just want only to like use a bunch of resources that I have? Or like, do you want to develop something different here? And I was like, okay, I hear you doing this. So what is that? Let's step into what it is that's calling you right now. And then we had a far more intimate, like circle-esque conversation that was deepening the nature of our experience together in that conversation. And so that call is kind of like maybe a little emblematic of our relationship, where there are different dynamics at play. In some dynamics, we are like working with one thing, and in another dynamic, we're working with something else. And both are real and alive in how I interact with Vīrabhadra from my perspective. And I would, yeah, so I'll stop there.
Yeah. Oh man. Yeah, what a juicy thing. What it's like to, because yeah, we got to know, we got to find out what it's actually like to live with your friends, not just to, you know, collaborate with them on projects, but to live with them. And yeah, I mean, a part of like the first like thing is like a part of me wants to say like living with anyone for me is kind of like hard. I hold back a lot of like judgments and annoyance. So just on that level, like getting to see the parts of myself, yeah, that like didn't trust Yuli or was not okay with how you were showing up. And then getting to interrogate those with your help, getting to see myself through you so that I could hopefully drop some of my views and then see you. Yeah. Oh my. Yeah, could just go into that for a while, but instead, I think maybe I'll touch on the collaboration a little more, on the friendship and the broader picture, and in the Monastic Academy, like where does this fit in the vision? Where does friendship, where does collaboration fit in the vision as I see it? And I think there are a lot of people who want to do good in the world, a lot of people who develop deeply a sense of wisdom and love, a sense of really caring about what is true, a sense of really caring about others, and changing their life in a way to access more wisdom and love. But often those same people aren't as concerned with collaboration, with choice, with decisions, with resources, and with power. And I want to bring that into the friendship I have with Yuli as well. That it's not just that, yeah, I love you, Yuli. You're, you know, we've talked about how we're like brothers before, but there's also something in which we have stuff to do. Like we can exchange information, we can exchange a sort of support, a sort of motivation, a sort of confidence. We can question each other's views, offer each other the tool of a sort of sharp inquiry, a sort of skeptical inquiry. And through that, there is there's not just this sense of love and friendly kindness, but also the sense of friendship through like, we're working on something really damn important and we can't do it alone. Like if like it would be a huge loss if we stopped having our conversations every month or every couple of weeks, whenever we bump around to it, if we stopped having the option to make requests of each other for things we need. So yeah, and just what I think our time together at Willow, at the Willow Monastic Academy did, for me, a lot of that getting to see why it is that I don't trust you, getting to interrogate that within myself and coming to trust you more, I now feel so much more able to give you things, to just give you time as much as, is helpful. And to challenge you when I think my time is not being used well, but to just get right into what is important. What do you need right now? Do you need, what kind of support can I offer you as a friend and as a collaborator in facing these big projects that we're facing? Yeah, hopefully that addresses some of what Daniel is getting at.
And I think it's worth emphasizing that I'll jump in with this, that there's a kind of like deeper trust underneath the specific aspects of difference in approach to things, both in the example we gave earlier at the Willow Monastic Academy, where the deep underlying structure is you train to like deeply develop and see what's happening and find synergy, but also in the specific example we just voiced in the conversation, where it's like the ability for both of us, for Vīrabhadra to say like, oh, okay, well, here's a bunch of like resources that you're asking me about, and to step into that, even though that's not precisely what he wanted, and then to voice precisely what he wanted. And then for me to be like, oh, cool, let's set aside the work agenda and step right into what is here. Like that flexibility comes from like this shared underneathness that I think I hold, and I would say Vīrabhadra holds, about the intersection. It's both our friendship as individuals in the way that we've cultivated it at the Monastic Academy, and personally and within Effective Altruism, but it's also the intersectionality of Effective Altruism and monasticism. Like they're both, these kind of like meta-aligned projects, and they both help you practice the skill of meta-alignment. They both help you practice same-sidedness while there is surface level productive or sometimes unproductive disagreement or conflict.
So there's something coming up for me that's related to what Daniel just asked, and since there's no questions in the chat, I'll go ahead and ask it. And it's sort of feeling into the field between you two more, and then it's going to be gesturing some of the stuff that you already said, but from a different angle. And perhaps I'll lovingly stir the pot a little further. So for myself, I had a lot of close philosophical friendships in my life, and where it felt like we're like a close alignment, and we were on path together, fellow travelers. And then we, what happens usually, like we diverged and went down separate paths. And in my more immature days, like a deep annoyance came online when that happened. And like an unconscious judgment, like, dude, what the fuck? Like, it's nice what you're doing, but like, you're missing out, like, get back in the game. Both of you strike me as having a more mature friendship than what I expressed. And you explicitly recognize the value that you're both bringing and the path that you're on. But I'm curious if there was certain like pre-irrational annoyances or judgments that emerged and perhaps that are still there. And maybe it's coming from like a desire for unity or like a longing to be like fully in it together. So feel free to take your replies any way you'd like to go, but I'm curious more about that aspect of the relationship dynamic and on an energetic level, and how you both processed it.
I think I had an emotional affinity for effective altruism that felt hurt and betrayed at some point when I realized that Virabhadra's personal journey had taken him to a relationship with effective altruism that wasn't similar to the one that I was having. It felt like there was an aspect of my friendship to Virabhadra that was then made fragile by having learned the deeper relationship that Virabhadra had with effective altruism throughout his tenure as the community builder for Effective Altruism Toronto. So I don't know. Virabhadra, is it cool if I share like a specific thing that you've said to me in confidence about like your relationship to effective altruism?
I don't imagine
you're probably cool with everything.
Problem, and I'll just like say if I think it doesn't represent me.
Perfect. Thank you. Yeah, so Virabhadra told me once, he was like, oh, well, I wasn't in it for the right reasons. I wasn't like in it sort of like knowing, you know, I was kind of like looking for this answer as opposed to like, I don't know, I don't know how to phrase the alternative, but I know that he told me, he's like, oh, it feels easy to push away effective altruism right now because it feels like I wasn't in it for the right reasons in the first place. And when I had heard that, a part of me was like, oh, fuck, man. I really thought we were like deeply aligned on this. I thought like this was like, you know, a real important part of how we are oriented together as like two souls traveling whatever paths we're traveling. So that was there. And I don't know what I want to say on that, except to reveal that it was there and to say that, like, I suppose a part of me wishes that things like that didn't occur, you know? So like at the moment when it happened, it was obvious from a logical standpoint to be like, oh, well, obviously a person is different and you can use this as a deepening of friendship as opposed to a dividing. And yet it's true that there was some pain. Yet it's true that this is an insight into the nature of my friendships and how they are built up and what it is that attracts me to different people. So there was some insight that was still coming from that space, in realizing that like, oh man, it does matter to me that I want to have people in my life who I am able to share more with and have more specific object level alignment with. Even though I believe that Virabhadra and I are still like at the meta level, like deeply, deeply aligned. In practice, we're doing a bunch of different stuff, but I don't see us as like fundamentally doing different things. Okay, I don't know if that gave you some good stuff or not.
Well, I could chime in now and say, I think that was like a good characterization, and I really appreciate you bringing it forward. There's like a sense of tenderness I'm like feeling now about that, and also in regard to myself, to like the wording that I could use is that I see my reasons as kind of corrupted. Like there's a part of the reason that was like so beautiful, worthwhile, but another part that was just kind of self-defeating, like defeating the entire thing, impure, you could say. Yeah. And to weave that into my response to Peter's question, there is definitely on like on a more like immediate guttural like level, some like frustration or annoyance with like seeing you choose to exit the training. And I think like right there with that, like in conflict with that is also like, dude, you do what you feel is best. Like if anybody is doing, whether it's monastic training, especially monastic training, or effective altruism or anything, if anyone is doing that, like simply because they feel like compelled to do it, if it doesn't feel alive, if it doesn't feel expansive, go for it. So there's definitely both just sitting in my gut, this like, oh, usually like there's so much more that I think we all have to do to create the mind that can do the kind of collaboration that can live the values, that can demonstrate the kind of collaboration, not necessarily what, but the how of collaboration, to develop that mind that can do that. I think we all have a lot of work to do. Yeah, and monastic training, effective altruism, I don't think these things are at a stage now where they're for everyone. I think they are different communities, different movements are set up in different ways where there are different pieces to grab onto. And I can definitely say for Monastic Academy, like right there, yeah, in my gut with that frustration is also a sense of like, if this is not working for you, if it may be more like limiting or harmful, like by all means, go forth into the world, into the rest of the world. Because of course, yeah, this place, though it's closer to the woods, you know, and it's Willow's 90 minutes east of Toronto, and these monastic academies are often located out of cities, but they're not out of the world. As you can see by me showing up at this call, I'm interested in communicating and collaborating with all y'all when is, you know, to the degree that can be afforded, to the degree that can be in harmony with everything else, with the training.
So we're almost at the bottom of the hour. Perhaps Yuli and Vīrabhadra can share some final thoughts before we close out.
Shit, I'm tempted to throw just like a bomb in here. Don't know if that's the right thing to do during closing time though. I've been acting on my impulses so far and trusting my intuition of having things be like playful and spicy. Check some faces and see what the room is feeling as I say that. Okay, I'm seeing some excitement, but okay, you know what? I'll just do it. I'll go for it. So here's a tough question that I want to throw in while we have just a few minutes, and just like give my great respect to us and even being able to have the level of complexity of this conversation in some short span of time. But anyway, here goes. How sure are you, Vīrabhadra, that the whole purpose of your training isn't to realize you don't need training?
So I'm definitely holding Peter's offer for a wrap up, but I love your question. So, how sure am I? So I think to try to do both, to try to give some final remarks and answer the question. In me, there's a sense that the training will continue until all beings are in a state where we can collaborate. Yeah, at a more effective level. So basically it's this sort of infinite game. And yeah, I don't have the right words for that now, but there's this sense of like, I'll finish my training when it reminds me of what you said earlier, the training, whether you're in a monastic academy or not, the training goes on. And I've appreciated this call as an example to do that, to interface with these questions as a way to figure out how to get closer to collaboration, get closer to harmony, and train in this moment. Yeah.
Can I make one request of you? Can you ask me whatever the hardest question you think is that I couldn't possibly answer in like this tiny space? I would really love it if you were able to like reciprocate that playful challenge. I think that would create space for further dialectic rippling out and really feed my personal appreciation of this conversation.
Yeah, there's different ways I could do that. Yeah, I think right now I'm wanting to dodge that by saying, I already asked it. How do you live? How do we live? Just repeating the question from earlier. Yeah. And yeah, I'm really appreciating so much of what has been threaded in through the comments and just through everyone's participation in this. I've really been like surprised by how much happens in text through this video chat. Yeah, and that there's clearly so much more that we could entangle and unravel. Yeah.
And I really respect and appreciate your willingness to step into the hot seat and like take me up on that like what I imagine to be a very daunting offer to ask that question. And I laughed hard when I saw Jean's comment of like, how sure you want to answer that? Yeah. So that's just like a quick reveal. And I wanted to say thank you. Thank you for this conversation, Vīrabhadra. Thank you, Peter, for having us here. And thank you very much to each of you whose presence and curiosity is what this conversation is about. I'm very curious to see and not know most of, but find some of what the ripple effects are of this conversation out into our individual lives and networks. For how we live and what we do. Bam. All right.
And I think with Vīrabhadra's dodging your question officially sets up part 2 of To Effective Altruists to a Monastery. So stay tuned for that at the Stoa. And on my end, what I find most juicy and what I think the Stoa is in service towards is figuring out how people can relate, collaborate, and just be with each other who are on different paths with different perspectives. And both of you today just beautifully showed up. So thank you so much for that, my friends. And some quick closing announcements. Our next session at the Stoa, we have laughter yoga. That's September 13th at 10 a.m. Eastern time. I fully expect Virabhadra and Yuli to be there laughing together in meta-systematic collaboration. And in mid-October, I will be visiting Virabhadra in Willow in person. Hopefully, we'll have a Stoa super session, so you can stay tuned for that. It'll be posted soon. So that being said, everyone, thank you so much for coming to Stoa today.